Hello, this is Stabilizing the Economy, Section C, Tools of Fiscal Policy. Our prioritized standard is Economic Standard 41. Objectively, we're going to compare and contrast how the tools of fiscal policy can influence both unemployment and inflation. Marginal tax rates are the tax rates that the government can raise or lower. So whenever you hear a politician say they're going to lower your taxes, or hey, they're going to raise your taxes, they're talking about marginal tax rates. Those are the rates that can be raised and can be lowered. An expansionary fiscal policy will result in the lowering of marginal tax rates. So if they're lowering your taxes, with tax rates lowered, people will have more disposable income, therefore increasing aggregate demand. This decreases unemployment because now we have more production, which therefore means more jobs. But the inflation rate will actually increase. A restrictive fiscal policy will result in the raising of marginal tax rates. So if your taxes are increasing, so therefore if tax rates raised, people actually have less disposable income, therefore decreasing aggregate demand. And based on aggregate demand being decreased, this will actually reduce our inflation rates, but it'll actually increase the unemployment rate. Now, tax incentives are special tax breaks that the government gives to businesses to encourage them to invest in new capital. Now, these tax incentives are administered through what's called the investment tax credit, which permits firms to deduct from its corporate income taxes a percentage of the money that is spent on new capital. So in this instance, if there's a solar investment tax credit, basically that means that normally they have to pay $18,750 worth of taxes that year. But based on that tax credit, it actually takes money off of their tax bill. So now they actually end up having to pay less money in taxes because they actually invested in solar that year. Increasing the investment tax credit will encourage businesses to expand, since expansion will now be cheaper. If instead they decided to decrease the investment tax credit, this would actually discourage businesses from expanding, since expansion will actually then be more expensive. So if this tax credit went away, that means their tax bill goes up and therefore less incentive for them to actually invest in solar that year. Raising or lowering the investment tax credit additionally has an effect on unemployment and inflation. So raising the investment tax credit actually increases aggregate demand. Therefore, decreasing unemployment, because more production means more jobs, but you're going to notice the inflation rate is going to increase. Conversely, lowering the investment tax credit decreases aggregate demand. Decreasing inflation, yay, inflation's dead. But unemployment, since production levels have declined, will likely increase. Now, changes in government spending can directly influence aggregate demand, either pumping resources into or taking resources out of the economy due to the large monetary size of many government contracts. So if the government is spending money, usually that probably means millions or potentially billions of dollars being spent at a time. So a government contract is going to have a large multiplier effect in the economy. Increasing government spending, although on a test, don't be surprised if I use the term expenditures instead of spending, causes an increase of aggregate demand. So if we have an increase of our aggregate demand, as you should already know by now, because we've only done it about 1,000 times, that's going to result in a lowering of unemployment because total production has increased and you can't produce without people, so therefore more jobs. Downside, higher rates of inflation. And decreasing your government spending actually causes a decrease of aggregate demand. And as you know, by decreasing that aggregate demand, we will be massacring and killing our inflation monster. But the consequence is production levels also drop, therefore loss of jobs, so unemployment rate goes up. Next tool of fiscal policy are public transfer payments, which are tax dollars that are redistributed to non-productive actors in the economy. By non-productive actor, that means nothing is actually sold in exchange for the payment. That's what they mean by that, which include things like Social Security payments, veterans benefits, government health insurance, which would be like Medicare, Medicaid, and also unemployment benefits. So changing public transfer payments can be illustrated well through looking at unemployment benefits. So when unemployment rises, more are going to be eligible for unemployment benefits. So if you don't have a job, therefore you can get unemployment benefits, which means you'll have some more money in your pocket now. So based on having more money in your pocket, you can actually purchase some more things, which therefore means that the fact that you don't have a job is not going to translate in a massive loss of other people's jobs. Consequence, of course, inflation is probably going to go up there a little bit too. And conversely, when unemployment lowers, less are going to be eligible for unemployment benefits. So when people have our jobs now, they're not going to be getting that check from the government anymore. So therefore, you're probably going to notice a little bit of a drop in the aggregate demand because, hey, you don't need the government money anymore. So you'll probably notice some drop in the inflation rate because of that. Downside, could notice a little job loss. When we're talking about public transfer payments, most of these federal public transfer payments tend to keep aggregate demand relatively steady or possibly rising. So the logic is they don't want to see massive multiplier effect of job losses is mostly the logic behind public transfer payments. Now, progressive income taxes prove to be a tool of fiscal policy by a built-in mechanism that will actually keep aggregate demand relatively steady. So during periods of prosperity, incomes tend to rise, which would normally mean that aggregate demand is probably going to increase. But those increases in income will actually put people into higher tax brackets. So therefore, you're making more money now. So in theory, you have more money to spend, but now you're actually paying more in taxes too. So the increase of taxes should probably lessen the increase of aggregate demand and therefore keep prices at a more steady rate. I could show you, but I feel like I show you 20 times today. Also, during periods of economic decline, incomes tend to decline, which would normally mean that aggregate demand also declines. Therefore, those decreases in income, so like you were here, but now you have gone to a lower level because you lost that job. So those decreases in income will put people into a lower tax bracket, therefore decreasing their taxes. So therefore, the decrease of taxes actually lessens the decrease of your aggregate demand, therefore keeping your prices at a more steady rate again. So again, logic here is you want to keep things pretty close to where they would have been so that you don't have a lot of inflation. All right, that concludes Stabilizing the Economy, Section C. Tools of Fiscal Policy lecture. Our prioritized standard is Economic Standard 41. And objectively, now you can compare and contrast how the tools of fiscal policy can influence both unemployment and inflation.